So it's the spring of 2011, right? And the most heavily hunted fugitive in human history.
The guy with a $25 million target on his back.
Exactly,
Yeah.
$25 million. And he is sitting in his bedroom.
Yeah.
But he isn't, shivering in some remote mountain cave. He isn't leaning over a table actively plotting the tactical intricacies of the next global terror attack.
Not at all.
No, he is he's watching a pirated episode of the Japanese anime Case Closed.
Which is it's surreal.
It is. He's watching that viral YouTube video, Charlie Bit My Finger.
Right, the British baby.
Yeah, that one. And he's listening to the muffled sounds of his grandkids playing downstairs. Maybe he's, glancing out the window at the family cow grazing in the yard.
A cow.
A literal cow. So today we are going on a deep dive, completely dissecting the bizarre, decade-long, multi-billion-dollar intelligence puzzle that led to that specific, incredibly surreal moment.
Because it is a profound jarring of expectations for you listening. I mean, we spent 10 years conditioned by this wilderness archetype.
Oh,
right?
totally. The Santa mastermind.
Exactly. Surviving on scraps and the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush. And the reality of his domestic life is just so fiercely counterintuitive. It forces us to re-examine, well, pretty much everything we think we know about modern manhunts, counterterrorism, and really the psychology of deep hiding.
Yeah, and we're doing that today by cross-referencing this massive, completely fascinating stack of documents.
It's a great stack.
It really is. We've got the official CIA historical accounts, which honestly read like a masterclass in agonizing patience.
Oh, excruciating patience.
Yeah, and then we're looking at retrospective notes from the Obama Foundation to kind of understand the sheer, terrifying geopolitical calculus going on inside the Situation Room.
Because the stakes were unbelievable.
Right. But we're also looking at the other side of the fallout. I was reading through this leaked Pakistani government investigation. It's called the Abbottabad Commission Report, which the Brookings Institution heavily analyzed.
And that paints a completely different picture.
A picture of systemic failure that is just hard to wrap your head around. Throw in a strategic impact report from the Rand Corporation and encyclopedic architectural blueprints of the compound itself, and you realize this isn't just a military story.
No, it's not.
It's an information story.
It absolutely is an information story. In fact, to even begin to understand the climax, the kinetic military action in May 2011, you first have to understand the decade of absolute overwhelming white noise that came before.
Oh, white noise, yeah.
Because from an intelligence perspective, the trail didn't just go cold after the September 11th attacks. It inverted.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to dig into that inversion because we have to rewind to late 2001, right?
Right, the Battle of Tora Bora.
Exactly. The U.S. military is basically dropping the hammer on the Tora Bora cave complex in the White Mountains of eastern Afghanistan. And then the target just evaporates.
He just vanishes.
Yeah, the historical accounts show that from December 2001 onward, Osama bin Laden vanishes into the snow, presumably moving east into the Parakanara area of Pakistan.
And that geographical shift, that's where the intelligence paradigm collapses.
How so?
Well, in Afghanistan, you had a conventional, albeit really rugged, theater of war. But once he crossed the border into the tribal regions of Pakistan...
He's in a sovereign nation now.
Exactly. A sovereign nation where the U.S. couldn't just overtly march battalions through the valleys. The intelligence community suddenly had to rely on, fragments and rumors and signal intercepts.
In an environment where he's totally off the grid.
Right. The target had deliberately stripped away his own digital exhaust. He stopped using satellite phones. He stopped using electronic communication altogether.
So we enter this era where the volume of disinformation is just staggering.
It's a nightmare for analysts.
I was looking through the sheer number of wild theories that intelligence analysts had to legitimately chase down, and it's exhausting just reading it. For years, there was this incredibly persistent narrative that bin Laden was suffering from chronic end-stage kidney disease.
Oh, the dialysis rumor.
Yes. The theory was that he needed a massive dialysis machine to survive, so he had to be tethered to some advanced medical facility, or he was already dead.
And see, what's fascinating here is the medical supply chain vulnerability. From an intelligence gathering perspective, that makes perfect logical sense.
Right. Follow the machine.
Exactly. You can't find a man who doesn't use a phone, but you can theoretically track the importation of specialized dialysis fluid or, the movement of nephrologists in the region.
But the problem is...
The foundational premise was entirely false.
Entirely false. We have this Pakistani surgeon, Dr. Amer Aziz, who actually treated bin Laden at a temporary clinic in Jalalabad in November 2001.
And he went on the record.
He explicitly debunked this. He stated the man was in excellent health, had no kidney failure, required no dialysis, yet the intelligence apparatus just couldn't let the rumor go.
Well, because when you're operating in a total information vacuum, you kind of cling to any hypothesis that gives you a methodology for tracking.
Even a bad one.
Right. And state actors were inadvertently making the noise worse.
Oh, I saw that in the French intelligence leak.
The 2006 one.
Yeah. In 2006, a regional French newspaper actually published a leaked foreign intelligence document claiming Saudi officials had confirmed bin Laden died of typhoid fever in Pakistan.
Typhoid fever. It's just wild.
It was such a massive geopolitical claim that Jacques Chirac, the French president at the time, had to hold a press conference just to say it was totally unconfirmed.
And let's look at the mechanics of why these rumors propagate. You
Yeah.
know, you have a highly decentralized terrorist network. Even mid-level al-Qaeda commanders didn't know where their leader was.
So they're just guessing, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when they communicated with each other, they were passing along the exact same unverified rumors that the CIA was intercepting.
Like an echo chamber.
Totally. An intercepted email between two militants saying, I heard the sheikh died in the Kashmir earthquake.
Right, the 2005 earthquake.
Yeah. That suddenly becomes a piece of signals intelligence that has to be analyzed, graded for reliability, cross-referenced.
And some of the theories weren't even medical. There was a documentary called Feathered Cocaine.
Oh, the falconry one?
Yes. It legitimately argued bin Laden, who, to be fair, was an avid falconer, was living a life of luxury in Tehran, Iran, practicing falconry under state protection.
Right.
And reportedly, Israeli intelligence had Turkish sources claiming he was in northeastern Iran. It's like looking for a needle while thousands of people are constantly shouting that the needle is actually a piece of hay or dead or, living in Iran.
Which highlights the danger of confirmation bias in intelligence. If you believe state-sponsored terrorism is the primary threat, you start looking for your target in adversarial capitals like Tehran.
But the reality was much simpler.
Much simpler and much harder to combat. Bin Laden utilized a deeply analog enabling environment.
Wait, I'm struggling with that concept. The official sources talk about this enabling environment of loyalist tribes in the Swat Valley in Haripur, but there was a $25 million bounty on his head.
A lot of money.
Generational wealth.
Yeah.
How do you maintain an enabling environment when that kind of money is on the table? I understand religious loyalty, but $25 million. How did not one single neighbor, guard, or courier betray him over 10 years?
It comes down to the architecture of trust. The people immediately surrounding him, they weren't casual sympathizers. They were thoroughly vetted, ideologically hardened core members who had fought alongside him for decades.
Okay, sure. The inner circle.
But more importantly, the wider enabling environment didn't actually know who they were enabling.
What do you mean? Like they were kept in the dark?
Operational security dictates compartmentalization. The local tribesman delivering flour to a compound, he doesn't know he's delivering it to Osama bin Laden.
Oh, wow.
He knows he's delivering it to a respected, wealthy Pashtun merchant who demands extreme privacy. The network of protection is layered so thickly that the people who might be tempted by $25 million are kept entirely blind to the true identity of the asset they're protecting.
That makes a lot of sense. So the U.S. intelligence community is just drowning in typhoid rumors, earthquake rumors, falconry rumors.
A white noise.
Right. And they know he's alive because occasionally an analog communication slips out, like that intercepted 2005 letter to the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, confirming bin Laden is somewhere in the Waziristan region.
But Waziristan is a massive mountainous area.
Exactly. So how do you actually penetrate that layered architecture of trust?
You have to find the bridge between the analog ghost and the outside world. If the target doesn't emit a digital signal, you cannot use traditional signals intelligence, or SIGINT.
You can't trace a cell phone ping if there's no cell phone.
Exactly. You have to rely on human intelligence, or human T.
Mm.
And in this case, the breakthrough wasn't finding the target. It was finding the messenger.
The courier.
The courier.
I was reading through the Guantanamo Bay interrogation transcripts we pulled for this, and it blew my mind that this entire multi-billion-dollar manhunt essentially hinged on a single throwaway nickname mentioned by detainees.
Acuna.
Right. They kept talking about this guy, a protege of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who carried messages for the inner circle. But they only had his operational pseudonym, Abu Ahmed al-Kuwati.
And Acuna is incredibly common in Arabic culture. It usually means father of it, followed by the eldest son's name, or it denotes geographic origin.
So al-Kuwati just means the Kuwati.
Exactly. It's designed specifically to sever a person from their legal identity, their family lineage, their actual citizenship.
Okay, but put yourself in the shoes of a listener right now. Imagine trying to track down a single Uber driver in a foreign country using only a nickname. Like, oh yeah, we're looking for the Chicago guy.
Right.
We have satellites that can read license plates from space. We have the NSA tapping global telecommunications. How does an entire multi-billion-dollar global intelligence apparatus take years just to figure out one guy's real legal name, which didn't happen until 2007?
Yep, 2007.
And then another 2 years to actually locate him on a map in Pakistan in 2009.
Well, because second, all those satellites and wiretaps is utterly useless if you don't know what search terms to put into the database.
Oh.
You're vacuuming up petabytes of data across the globe every single day. Unless you know the exact phone number, the exact IP address, or the exact legal name to query, the NSA's capability is just a giant warehouse of unindexed noise.
So they literally had to build the index from scratch using human interrogation.
Precisely. And Al-Qaeda's counterinterrogation tradecraft was highly disciplined.
They were trained for this.
Detainees would deliberately mix truth with fiction. Some would admit knowing al-Kuwati but claim he was dead. Others would give slightly altered physical descriptions.
Just to muddy the waters.
Exactly. It took years of cross-referencing, thousands of hours of interrogations, just to confirm that this courier was, in fact, a living, active, high-level conduit.
In the background they eventually pieced together explains why he was so good at his job. He was an ethnic Pashtun from Pakistan, but he grew up in Kuwait.
Which is a massive linguistic and cultural advantage.
It really is.
It's the perfect operational profile. His fluency in Arabic allowed him to communicate intimately and build deep trust with the Arab high command of al-Qaeda.
Right.
But his Pashtun heritage and fluency in Pashto allowed him to move seamlessly across the Pakistani landscape without drawing the attention of local police or tribal militias. He was a chameleon.
So it's 2009. They finally get a real name, they get a phone number associated with him, and in August 2010, CIA paramilitary operatives locate his vehicle in Peshawar.
A huge breakthrough.
Huge! And this is where I want to talk about the physical tradecraft, because the discipline required here is agonizing. If I finally find the one guy who knows where bin Laden is, my instinct is to kick down his door, grab him, and interrogate him until he talks.
Which would have been a catastrophic operational failure.
Because the network would instantly know he was missing.
Exactly. The protocol for high-value target couriers assumes they will eventually be compromised. If al-Kuwaiti fails to check in at his designated time, or if his family reports him grabbed by unmarked vans in Peshawar,
Alarms go off across the entire network.
instantly, the ultimate target bin Laden would immediately be relocated, the trail goes cold again, perhaps forever.
So instead of grabbing him, you have to follow him.
Which is so much harder.
Right. Tracking a highly trained operational courier who actively uses counter-surveillance techniques is incredibly difficult. You can't just have one car tailing him. You have to use overlapping teams, vehicle swaps, parallel routing. He's checking his rearview mirror, taking random turns, looking for patterns.
It's an exercise in excruciating patience. You might track him for weeks and only see him go to the grocery store or, visit a mosque.
Just normal stuff.
Yeah. You have to accept the risk of losing him in traffic rather than risk being spotted. You have to map his entire pattern of life without ever letting him sense the invisible net closing around him.
And eventually, that invisible net follows him out of the chaotic streets of Peshawar, down the highway, and he drives into a location that completely shatters every psychological assumption the CIA had.
Complete paradigm breaker.
He doesn't drive into the rugged, lawless tribal mountains. He drives into a developed suburban city called Abbottabad, just 30 miles north of Pakistan's capital, Islamabad.
For years, the prevailing intelligence assumption was that bin Laden had to be in the federally administered tribal areas, the FATA.
Why was that the default assumption?
Because the FATA is historically anti-government, rugged, culturally hostile to foreign intervention. It seemed like the perfect physical fortress.
Makes sense.
But al-Qaeda leadership recognized a fundamental flaw in that logic. The United States also knew it was the perfect fortress. Consequently, the FATA was the most heavily surveilled airspace in the world.
Oh, right.
It was crawling with informants and constantly patrolled by armed Predator and Reaper drones.
So bin Laden essentially reverse engineered the U.S. targeting matrix. He realized that hiding in the most obvious remote area made him a target. Instead, he chose Abbottabad. And looking at the encyclopedic details of this city, it is wild.
It really is.
It was founded by a British army officer in the 19th century. It is known for its pleasant weather and its military installations.
It's a cantonment city. It's heavily populated by retired and active duty Pakistani military officers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The compound that the courier drove into is in a neighborhood called Bilal Town. It was roughly 1 mile away from the Kakul Military Academy.
Just a mile.
For you listening, an American equivalent would be the most wanted terrorist on earth building a compound down the street from West Point, or like the Naval Academy in Annapolis.
It's the ultimate manifestation of urban camouflage.
Hiding in the lion's den.
Exactly. By embedding himself in the heart of the Pakistani military establishment, he effectively neutralized the threat of U.S. drone strikes.
Because they can't just bomb it.
Right. The CIA couldn't indiscriminately launch Hellfire missiles into a wealthy suburb of a nuclear-armed ally right next to their premier military academy without risking a global crisis. He used the Pakistani military's own structural integrity as a human shield.
But while the geography was brilliant camouflage, the actual architecture of the compound, the Waziristan Haveli, as locals called it, was a disaster of anomalies.
Total disaster.
I was reading the structural breakdowns, and it proves this concept we've talked about. Perfect camouflage is suspicious because normal life is messy. Normal people leave traces. This compound left a void.
Let's break down the physical footprint, because you're right, the anomalies are glaring when viewed through a specific analytical lens. The land was purchased in 2004 by the courier for roughly $48,000, and construction finished in 2005.
And the size of it.
The first red flag is the sheer scale. It was built on a plot of land 8 times larger than the neighboring suburban homes.
8 times larger. And then you look at the perimeter. We're talking concrete walls that are 12 to 18 feet high, topped with barbed wire. Normal suburban houses in Bilal Town do not look like maximum security prisons.
And there were 2 separate security gates you had to pass through just to get into the main courtyard.
And the architectural paranoia extends to the lines of sight, right?
Oh, aggressively. It was designed to prevent anyone from looking in, either from the ground or from the surrounding hills. The windows on the main 3-story structure were either completely opaque or positioned incredibly high on the walls.
My favorite detail, if you can call it a favorite, is the 3rd floor balcony. This was where bin Laden's private quarters were. He occasionally needed to go outside for fresh air or sunlight.
So what do they do?
They built an additional 7-foot privacy wall directly onto the balcony itself. Imagine standing on a 3rd-story balcony and staring at a 7-foot brick wall. It ensures that no neighboring roof and potentially no angled satellite could get a visual confirmation of his face.
It demonstrates a deep understanding of National Geospatial Intelligence Agency capabilities. He knew they were watching from space.
Or knew.
But the operational security went beyond architecture. It dictated their entire pattern of life. They had no internet connection. They had no telephone lines. They were completely dark to the digital world.
And that leads to the most suspicious domestic detail of all, the trash. In this relatively affluent suburban neighborhood, municipal services came regularly to collect the garbage.
But to any suburb.
Right, everyone put their bins out. But the residents of this massive, fortress-like compound never once put a single bag of trash on the curb. They burned absolutely everything within the walls.
Which is a classic intelligence indicator. Well, yeah. When an intelligence agency sees a facility burning its own trash in a residential zone, it immediately suggests they're destroying documents, cryptographic materials, or medical waste they don't want scavengers or rival intelligence agencies to find. In trying to leave 0 forensic evidence in the local landfill, they created a massive behavioral anomaly.
And the valuation discrepancy of this place is hilarious to me. When the story first broke, U.S. officials were briefing the press, calling it a $1 million luxury mansion. They were trying to paint this picture of bin Laden living like a king while his followers suffered. But local real estate agents in Abbottabad completely scoffed at that.
Right. From space, the large footprint and heavy security make it look like a high-value asset. Maybe a cartel boss or a corrupt general's estate.
But up close.
The ground truth was very different. Local valuations put it closer to $250,000. It wasn't a luxury palace. It was a utilitarian concrete bunker.
Bare bones.
Yeah, it lacked basic maintenance, the paint was peeling, and it was designed entirely for function and isolation, not comfort.
Which brings us perfectly to what was actually happening behind those opaque windows. We have to transition from the paranoid architecture of the exterior to the bizarre, incredibly claustrophobic reality of the interior.
It's a fascinating look inside.
And we know these details intimately because of the CIA's release of the recovered files in 2017. When the raid happened, they pulled nearly 500,000 computer files, 258 gigabytes of data out of that compound.
And to understand the contents of that digital cache, you first have to understand the demographics of who was living in that bunker for roughly 5 years.
It wasn't just him and the couriers.
Not at all. It wasn't just a handful of hardened militants. The compound housed around 20 people. You had the 2 couriers and their families living in the guest house. And in the main house, you had bin Laden, 3 of his wives, 8 of his children, and 5 of his grandchildren.
So it's essentially a multi-generational family compound trapped in a concrete box. And the daily life sounds like a bizarre cross between extreme religious austerity and bulk-buy suburban survivalism.
That's exactly what it was.
You have the physical modesty. There's no air conditioning, despite the brutal Pakistani summers. They sleep on cheap foam mattresses on the floor. The wives use whiteboards to homeschool the kids in Arabic and religious studies.
But feeding 20 people in a suburb without drawing attention is a logistical nightmare.
Exactly. You can't just have 20 people's worth of groceries delivered every week without someone asking questions. So the couriers would go to the local corner stores, like this place called Rashid's, and buy massive bulk quantities of basic goods.
It's like a Costco run.
Yeah, basically. They bought the best brands, Nestle milk, high-quality soaps. They bought huge flats of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and they would occasionally buy sweets and give them to the neighborhood kids.
Almost as a psychological smokescreen to seem like friendly, albeit reclusive, neighbors.
They also leaned into agricultural self-sufficiency to minimize trips to the market. They maintained a well-kept vegetable garden, growing cabbages and potatoes. They kept rabbits, raised about 100 chickens for eggs and meat, and even kept a cow grazing in the yard.
And this is the psychological disconnect you mentioned earlier.
The cow. I need you listening to pause here. Really think about this. This is the man who fundamentally altered the trajectory of the 21st century. He orchestrated the deaths of thousands, triggered invasions, forced the restructuring of the entire global security apparatus.
Yeah.
And his daily reality consists of making sure the chickens are fed, checking the cabbage yield, and wondering if the couriers picked up enough Pepsi. It is a staggering psychological disconnect. And it gets even more surreal when we crack open those hard drives.
The 258 gigabyte cache is a psychological goldmine. It reveals the profound boredom and the desperate need for escapism that comes with deep, multi-year isolation.
Alongside the grim stuff, the Al-Qaeda strategy PDFs, his personal journals, the horrific execution videos, the CIA found an absolute mountain of pirated pop culture.
So much media.
There was a huge collection of anime, specifically the Japanese detective show Case Closed. There were viral videos. The most famous one, Charlie Bit My Finger, was saved on his hard drive.
Not to mention the animated films. Ice Age. Gone of the Dinosaurs. Ants. Cars. Clips of Rowan Atkinson as Mr. Bean. Classic episodes of Tom and Jerry.
And the video games. The hard drives had saved files and emulators for Resident Evil 2, Final Fantasy VII, Half-Life, and Counter-Strike. Imagine the mastermind of global terrorism potentially playing Counter-Strike in his bedroom.
Now, we do have to apply some rigorous analytical context here.
Right, fair enough.
The CIA was careful to point out that with 20 people in the compound, including bored teenagers and young adults, it is highly likely that the video games and the anime belong to the children or the couriers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We can't say definitively that Osama bin Laden was spending his evenings trying to beat Resident Evil. However, the presence of this media underscores the reality of a completely hermetically sealed environment.
They were trapped.
Exactly. They couldn't go to a movie theater. The kids couldn't go to a park. The hard drives were their only window to the culture of the outside world.
Okay, I accept that maybe the kids were playing the games, but there was content on those drives explicitly curated for him. There were numerous documentaries about himself.
Oh, yes.
Morgan Spurlock's documentary, Where in the World is Osama bin Laden? CNN retrospectives on the hunt for him. He was literally sitting in a dark room, cut off from the sun, watching the Western media mythologize his own disappearance.
It's quite an image.
It paints a pathetic picture. It makes him look like a fading, irrelevant narcissist clinging to his past glory.
It is incredibly tempting to embrace that narrative. The irrelevant old man fading away in a bunker. But the CIA analysts strongly pushed back against that interpretation because the intelligence value of that cache proved the exact opposite.
How so? Was he really still in charge?
The files proved unequivocally that bin Laden was not a retired figurehead who had passed the torch. He was the active emir.
Really?
Yes, he was still micromanaging the global network. He was drafting complex strategic directives, advising affiliates in Yemen and North Africa on messaging, and debating tactical shifts.
Even without the internet?
Right. He was entirely separated from his fighters physically, but digitally, via these flash drives, moved by couriers, he was still the CEO of al-Qaeda.
Which radically changes the calculus in Washington. If he's just an irrelevant pensioner, maybe you don't risk a geopolitical crisis to get him. But if he is actively commanding a global terror network from a desk in Pakistan, the stakes are existential.
Absolutely.
Armed with the knowledge of this compound, the intelligence gathering phase hits a wall, and the U.S. government has to decide what to actually do. We enter the Situation Room in early 2011.
And this transition from analysis to kinetic military action is fraught with agonizing uncertainty. When we look at the Obama Foundation retrospectives, the defining characteristic of these meetings wasn't triumph, it was anxiety.
Because they weren't sure.
President Obama famously viewed the decision to raid the compound as a 50-50 proposition.
That blew my mind. After a decade of searching, after tracking the courier for years, after watching satellite feeds of a tall man pacing in the courtyard whom they literally just called the pacer because they couldn't see his face, they still only had a coin flip's chance that it was actually him.
A 50% chance.
It was a circumstantial guess.
Exactly. There was no photographic evidence. There was no intercepted audio confirming his voice inside. The intelligence was an inductive tower built on the behavior of the couriers and the anomalies of the architecture. And they were desperate for absolute confirmation.
So desperate that they launched one of the most controversial intelligence operations of the decade. The sources outline how the CIA recruited a local Pakistani doctor, Shakil Afridi.
The vaccination drive?
Yeah. They had him run a completely fake hepatitis B vaccination drive in Abbottabad. The sole objective was to get a nurse inside those 18-foot walls, prick the finger of one of the children, and secretly extract a DNA sample.
Because if they could sequence the DNA of a child inside the compound, they could cross-reference it with the DNA of bin Laden's sister, who had died in a hospital in Boston in 2010.
Oh, wow.
You would provide the definitive biological link.
But reading through the historical accounts, it seems like the operation failed. The nurses never got the DNA from the specific targets. They were just left with the circumstantial evidence.
Back to 50-50.
Right. So looking at the geopolitical reality, imagine pushing all your chips to the center of the poker table. Actually, no, poker is too clean of a metaphor. It's more like performing heart surgery in the dark. If you cut the wrong vessel, the patient bleeds out instantly.
That is a much more accurate representation of the risk.
Yeah.
Abbottabad is not a border town.
Yeah.
It is deep inside the sovereign territory of Pakistan.
Right.
Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state with a massive, highly capable military. The U.S. was contemplating a unilateral military strike deep inside their borders, without informing the Pakistani government or military brass.
Because they were terrified, the ISI Pakistani intelligence would leak the raid and bin Laden would escape.
Precisely. The operational security requirement dictated isolation. But if the intelligence was wrong, if the pacer was just a tall drug lord or a paranoid Saudi prince, the U.S. would have aggressively invaded an allied nation for nothing.
And the fallout would be massive.
Furthermore, if the Pakistani military detected the incoming U.S. helicopters and assumed it was an attack from their arch-rival India, they could have scrambled fighter jets.
Oh, gee.
You could have had American special forces in a sustained firefight with the Pakistani military. The potential for a catastrophic regional war was non-zero.
But the clock is ticking, the intelligence isn't going to get any better, and the decision is made. On April 29, 2011, the president authorizes the raid, and on May 2, Operation Neptune Spear is launched.
A historic night.
The Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DVGRU, commonly known as SEAL Team 6, flies out of Jalalabad, Afghanistan, in highly modified radar-evading stealth helicopters, and almost immediately the plan goes sideways.
The environmental variables in Abbottabad were different than in the mock-ups. The high walls of the compound created a microclimate, a vortex of air that caused one of the Black Hawk helicopters to lose lift.
It violently crash lands directly into the animal pens in the courtyard.
Which is terrifying to even visualize.
Yeah. But the discipline of these operators takes over. It's a roughly 40-minute operation. They blow the gates, clear the guest house, and methodically move up the stairs of the main building.
Taking it floor by floor.
They engage and neutralize the couriers and bin Laden's son. And finally, on the third floor, Osama bin Laden is killed. He is shot in the chest and the head. The radio call goes out to Washington. Geronimo Ikea, enemy killed in action.
What is truly remarkable from a tactical perspective is the precision. Despite the catastrophic helicopter crash, despite the intense firefight, the SEALs executed the primary objectives, gathered that massive 258-gigabyte digital cache, destroyed the downed helicopter with explosives to protect the stealth technology,
All in 40 minutes.
and extracted the target's body. They did all of this while minimizing civilian casualties in a densely packed suburban neighborhood, and they cleared Pakistani airspace before the local military could mount a coordinated response.
Within 24 hours, his body is flown back to Afghanistan for DNA identification, washed according to Islamic custom, and buried at sea from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Carl Vinson in the North Arabian Sea.
An incredibly swift resolution.
It is a breathtaking, almost cinematic resolution. But the tactical success is only half the story. The morning after the raid, the world wakes up to a fundamentally altered reality. And we need to spend some serious time dissecting the two completely divergent sides of the aftermath: catharsis and complicity.
The divergence in how May 2, 2011 was experienced in the United States versus how it was experienced in Pakistan is one of those profound studies in contrasting national narratives in modern history.
Let's start with the U.S. perspective, leaning heavily on the Obama Foundation retrospective by Ben Rhodes. The word they use over and over is catharsis.
Catharsis, right?
For the American public, this was the closing of an agonizing, open psychological wound that had been bleeding since the morning of September 11, 2001. You had college students who were children when the towers fell, spontaneously flooding into the streets outside the White House, chanting USA late into the night.
It was a collective exhale for the country, and the administration prioritized emotional closure.
They really did.
President Obama traveled to New York City to lay a wreath at Ground Zero, meeting privately with firefighters, police officers, and the families of the victims. It was a demonstration that the state apparatus had a long memory and had finally delivered on its foundational promise of justice.
And the military symbolism was incredibly potent. The president travels to Fort Campbell in Kentucky to privately meet with the DVGRU operators. And as a gesture of immense respect, the team gives him the physical American flag that was flying on the rescue helicopter during the Abbottabad raid.
Signed by the whole team.
Signed by every member. It became this sacred artifact of national resolve. But, and this is a big but, if you flip the globe and look at the domestic reaction inside Pakistan, the narrative wasn't about the death of a terrorist mastermind. It was about the utter violation of state sovereignty.
And to understand this, we have to rely heavily on the Brookings Institution's analysis of the leaked Abbottabad Commission report.
Right.
This was a secret internal investigation commissioned by the Pakistani government, which eventually leaked to Al Jazeera. The language used in this official state document is blistering.
Blistering is the right word.
They call the event a great humiliation. They state it was the worst humiliation for the Pakistani nation since their devastating 1971 war with India that resulted in the creation of Bangladesh.
The psychological blow to the Pakistani military establishment was immense. I mean, think about it from their side. A foreign power flew multiple helicopters deep into their sovereign airspace, conducted a loud, explosive, lethal military raid adjacent to their most prestigious military academy, and flew out.
All without the vaunted Pakistani security state having any idea it was happening until the helicopters were already gone.
Which brings up the central, glaring, uncomfortable question. How in the world did Osama bin Laden live in a massive, suspicious fortress for 6 years without the Pakistani intelligence service, the ISI, knowing about it?
Right.
The Pakistani report itself does not pull punches. It uses phrases like astonishing and unbelievable incompetence to describe the failures of the ISI and local police.
The commission's findings detail exactly how many red flags were missed.
And there were a lot.
The compound was constructed using false identities. The land transactions were illegal. The building violated zoning laws. The sheer size and security of the structure stuck out terribly. The fact that they burned their trash was a glaring anomaly.
So many signs.
Yet not a single local police officer, tax inspector, or intelligence operative ever meaningfully investigated the property.
So we have to ask the question that dominated international relations for years afterward. Was it gross incompetence, or was it active state complicity? Did the ISI know he was there and protect him?
This is where we must be incredibly precise with the findings of the source material.
Yes, exactly.
The Abbottabad Commission stated explicitly that they found no hard structural evidence of direct complicity by the Pakistani government or the highest levels of the ISI leadership.
No smoking gun.
They found no smoking gun memo saying protect the compound. However, the commission firmly stated they could not entirely rule out that rogue or retired elements within the ISI could have been complicit or turned a blind eye.
And they introduced a term that is vital to understand: the enabling environment. They didn't just blame local cops for not checking building permits. They blamed a broader ideological rot.
A much deeper issue.
The report points to the poisoned legacy of former Pakistani leader General Zia-ul-Haq from the 1980s, arguing his policies created a violent ideological infrastructure that allowed extremism to flourish.
To understand this enabling environment, you have to understand the concept of strategic depth, which has been a cornerstone of Pakistani military doctrine.
Okay, what is that?
Pakistan's primary existential fear is a conventional war with its massive neighbor, India. To prevent being surrounded, the ISI has historically cultivated and supported militant proxy groups in Afghanistan and Kashmir to maintain leverage and disrupt Indian influence.
So the state intelligence apparatus has a long documented history of funding, training, and tolerating armed jihadist groups when it aligns with their regional geopolitical goals.
Exactly. When you spend decades utilizing militant networks as instruments of statecraft, you create a deeply entrenched culture of sympathy for those networks within your own borders,
Especially among the military.
particularly among retired military and intelligence officers. The courier, al-Kuwati, had phone numbers in his device, linking him to members of Harkat ul-Mujahideen, a militant group the ISI had historically supported.
Oh, wow.
In an environment where the state routinely looks the other way regarding certain militant proxies, it becomes exceedingly easy for a high-value target like bin Laden to slip into the gray areas of bureaucracy and disappear.
Now, just to be perfectly clear for you listening, we are not taking a partisan side on U.S. foreign policy or dictating the internal moral politics of Pakistan here.
No, absolutely not.
We are strictly unpacking what these leaked investigations and geopolitical analyses conclude. But looking at these conclusions, it paints a picture of a fundamentally broken alliance. The U.S. was funneling billions of dollars in counterterrorism aid to Pakistan, yet deeply distrusted them, assuming they were playing a double game. Pakistan felt its sovereignty was repeatedly trampled by an arrogant ally.
It perfectly illustrates the tragedy of transactional international relations. Two nation-states can share a broad, overarching goal like regional stability, but have vastly divergent, even hostile tactical interests and internal political realities that make true cooperation impossible.
Which transitions us perfectly into our final and arguably most important thematic section: the strategic question.
The big picture.
We've spent almost an hour covering the grueling history, the paranoid architecture, the kinetic raid, and the diplomatic fallout. But now, over a decade later, we have to look at the Rand Corporation's strategic impact assessment and ask the cold, hard question: did decapitation work? Is the world actually a safer place because Osama bin Laden was killed in that bedroom?
This brings us to the core ongoing debate in global counterterrorism doctrine. The decapitation theory is essentially the premise that terrorist organizations are built like traditional hierarchies.
Like a corporation?
Right. If you eliminate the charismatic founder, the visionary leader, the organization will naturally fracture, lose its operational morale, fail to fundraise, and ultimately collapse.
Like cutting the head off a snake. And initially, the Rand report notes, the raid was a devastating, undeniable blow to al-Qaeda Central. They lost their founder, they lost their primary fundraiser, who had the deep connections in the Gulf. And most importantly, they lost their most charismatic and effective communicator.
The transition of power illustrates this perfectly. His successor, Ayman al-Zawahiri, was an incredibly experienced Egyptian jihadist, arguably the ideological brain of the organization, but he entirely lacked bin Laden's magnetic motivational aura. He was perceived as pedantic and uninspiring by the younger generation of fighters.
But the more significant impact wasn't just personality, it was operational paranoia. Zawahiri learned a terrifying lesson from the Abbottabad raid.
He realized that communication equals death.
Yeah.
The Rand report highlights a staggering metric. The 5 years following bin Laden's death, Zawahiri issued fewer than half the number of audio and video messages to his followers than he had in the previous 5 years.
He just went silent.
The U.S. strategy of high-value targeting didn't just eliminate the primary leader, it forced the new leadership to bury themselves so deep underground that their ability to effectively command, coordinate, and inspire was severely degraded.
So, al-Qaeda's central capacity to launch complex, multi-year, spectacular attacks like 9/11 is heavily diminished. That sounds like a definitive strategic victory.
On paper, yes.
But here's where I want to challenge that conclusion based on the second half of the Rand extrapolation. If taking out the king on the chessboard just causes the opponent to flip the board and start a dozen new, deadlier games, was this massive manhunt just a symbolic revenge mission? Because the report details exactly what happened when central control vanished.
The analogy of flipping the chessboard is apt, but perhaps a biological metaphor is better.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's the difference between cutting down an oak tree and trying to eradicate a fungus. Historically, al-Qaeda was structured like an oak tree. Bin Laden was the massive trunk. All funding, strategy, and authority stemmed directly from him. You cut the trunk, the tree falls.
Right. Bin Laden was notoriously resistant to the idea of franchising. He wanted strict central control over the brand.
But with him dead and Zawahiri isolated and silent, the organization fractured and decentralized. Regional affiliates like al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula gained autonomy. And more importantly, nature abhors a vacuum.
Something else takes over.
The void left by a weakened al-Qaeda was aggressively filled by the emergence of the Islamic State, or ISIS. And ISIS operated more like a mycelial network. There is no central trunk to cut.
It's just everywhere.
It is a decentralized ideological fungus that simply sprouts up wherever the geopolitical conditions are dark and damp enough, in the chaos of the Syrian civil war, in the deserts of Iraq and North Africa.
And ISIS posed a much more immediate, chaotic, and terrifying threat to the global public. The Rand report specifically links this ideological decentralization to the horrifying wave of attacks in places like Paris, at the Bataclan Theater, and the bombings in Brussels.
Just horrific events.
This wasn't a central commander in a cave issuing meticulously planned orders years in advance. It was a viral ideology crowdsourcing mass murder.
This raises an important question about the evolving nature of the threat landscape. The report specifically analyzes the perpetrators of the San Bernardino shooting in California and the attackers at the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris.
The homegrown threats.
Right. These individuals were homegrown terrorists. They were largely indifferent to the bureaucratic rivalries between al-Qaeda Central and ISIS.
They didn't care who the CEO was?
Exactly. They drew inspiration from the overarching extremist ideology, not from a specific leader's direct command. They would simply pledge loyalty on social media to whichever brand or flag suited their narrative at that specific moment.
So the ultimate conclusion from the Rand assessment is incredibly sobering. Al-Qaeda's specific hierarchical capacity to destroy American cities was heavily diminished. That is a clear tactical victory for the intelligence community.
Undeniable.
But the resulting emergence of decentralized, franchised, crowdsourced terror means the world as a whole is, quote, probably not safer. It is a deeply chilling thought to end on, considering the billions of dollars and thousands of lives spent reaching that third-floor bedroom.
It proves that decapitation is a necessary tool in the arsenal of counterterrorism.
No.
I mean, you cannot allow architects of mass casualty events to operate with impunity, but it is by no means a decisive or final solution.
It's just one part.
You can eliminate the architect, but if the ideological blueprint has already been distributed to the world, others will build upon it in ways you cannot predict.
Wow. Okay, let's bring this all back to center. We have journeyed from the freezing, snowy escapes of the Tora Bora mountains through the painstakingly slow analog hunt for a courier using nothing but a nickname.
Quite a journey.
We uncovered a massive, paranoid suburban compound hiding in plain sight next to a military academy filled with kids, cows, and hard drives loaded with strategy memos and pirated anime. We've witnessed a geopolitical earthquake in the White House Situation Room, and we've grappled with the profoundly uncomfortable reality of what actually comes after the mission accomplished moment.
It's a lot to process.
I really want to thank you, the listener, for taking the time to explore these complex, contradictory layers with us today. It is a story we all thought we fully knew, but the granular details change the entire complexion of the narrative.
And as we sign off, I'd like to leave you with one final lingering question to consider. We just spent an hour discussing a grueling, decade-long hunt for a physical man in a physical compound. But if the ultimate paradoxical cost of eliminating a single physical leader is the creation of a decentralized, digital, and franchise-based network of homegrown extremism, At what point does traditional manhunt warfare become entirely obsolete? What happens to global security when the next great threat doesn't have a physical compound to raid at all, but exists entirely in the minds and encrypted hard drives of isolated individuals scattered around the world?